Do you love Night Falls, California? Do you want to know how we make it? Join us for Breakfast at the Redwood, where we take you behind the scenes for an in-depth discussion with the show's creators. Listen now on nightfallsmedia.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And now, welcome back to Night Falls, California.
After alerting the nurses at Night Falls Community Hospital of Charley's newfound state of consciousness, I call Chief Nellis. He proclaims that he will be there within 10 minutes. I then call Travis Warren. I end up leaving a voicemail for him after...
Hey, it's Travis. Leave a message.
I wait in the hallway outside of Charley's room, not wanting to interrupt the Cooper sister reunion or disturb the handful of hospital personnel that have just rushed inside, closing the door behind them. After what seems like an eternity, the door to Charley's room opens up, and the nurses begin walking out. At the same time, I hear the elevator down the hall chime. I turn just in time to see an out-of-uniform Richard Nellis walk out and start making a beeline towards me. Looking at my watch, I see that, true to his word, he has arrived 9 minutes after I called him. He seems to have regained a bit of the vigor he had during our first meeting earlier this morning, as when he approaches me, he says,
So what's the word? She doing okay?
I don't know. Honestly, I haven't been in there since she woke up.
You are no help whatsoever, you know that?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Doc, come here a minute.
The chief and doctor speak briefly, but their discussion is spirited. The doctor tries to tell Rich that he shouldn't go in to see Charley as she's slightly delirious and needs to rest, saying something about traumatic experiences and elevated stress levels. The chief disagrees and proceeds to head towards Charley's room. When the doctor tries to protest further, he responds,
What are you gonna do, have me arrested?
As he says this, he flips out his badge with one hand and his middle finger with the other. The doctor stands in stunned silence, his mouth agape as he watches the chief enter the room. Sheepishly, I follow him inside, avoiding eye contact with the doctor. I enter just in time to see the following exchange.
Miss Cooper, my name is Richard Nellis. I'm the chief of police for the KFPD. And you can call me Rich, all right?
Am I in trouble?
Oh, no, of course not. No, I just have a question for you. You think you're able to answer right now?
I don't...
It's a simple question. I'd just like to get it out of the way now, if you're okay with that.
I suppose so.
What happened to you?
What? What do you mean?
I mean, where have you been all this time?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
The chief stares at Charley with intensity, as if he were trying to look through to her soul. The corners of his mouth begin to twitch. Charley looks back at the chief with an expression that is equal parts confusion and terror.
Charley, what year is it?
What?
What year is it?
2009?
Oh, fuck.
What's going on?
Charley looks around, frightened and confused. First at the two total strangers in the room, Chief Nellis and myself, then at Sydnie. The look of terror on Charley's face intensifies as she begins to truly notice the difference in her sister's appearance that can only be brought on by 10 years of aging. Sydnie, the chief, and I all look at each other as we realize the unfortunate, disturbing truth.
What's going on?
Charley Cooper has no memory of the past 10 years. Two weeks have passed since that night. In the days following Charley's return, a sense of unease washed over Night Falls. In spite of Chief Richard Nellis's best efforts, word of her homecoming spread through the town like wildfire. Everyone was talking about it, and no one was talking about it, depending on how you look at things. Practically overnight, Charley Cooper went from being a local legend to the town's dirty little secret. After the initial shock wore off, the town braced itself for another invasion of news vans, cameramen, and reporters. It never came. The only arrival in Night Falls to cover Charley's return was a single blogger working for an online news site that specializes in listicles and personality quizzes. The blogger arrived one morning, filmed a single video of Sydney Cooper on his smartphone, and left town that afternoon. That single interview produced the following clip, the only one used by news media when talking about Charley coming home.
Yeah, it's, we're glad to have her home, and, we're glad she's safe, and we want to thank the hard-working men and women of the KFPD for working so hard to, find her. Yeah.
With the threat of a media circus seemingly past, Charley began the process of re-entering her loved ones' lives, at least as much as she could while confined to her hospital bed. The unenviable task of catching her up on the events of the past 10 years fell mostly on Sydney's shoulders, though Travis came to see her every chance he could. Every time he visited, Travis would first stop somewhere in town to pick up a small gift, usually flowers or a stuffed animal, then make sure as many people as possible saw him with it as he made his way to the hospital.
I like the looks on their faces when they see me. I can tell they want to apologize to me. None of them do, but it's a start.
As time passed, Charley was able to accept the new status quo of her life, though she remained unable to recall any information regarding her disappearance. After numerous tests revealed that she was more or less healthy, aside from the smoke damage to her lungs, Charley was cleared to be sent home. I asked Sydney if I could be present for the homecoming. She said yes, on the one condition that I assist her in cleaning out Charley's old bedroom.
Jesus, this place is a mess.
Sydney Cooper stands in the doorway of Charley's room, her hands on her hips as she surveys the task before her. I stand behind her, looking over her shoulder. She's right. It is a mess. It seems to wash over the room like a tidal wave, starting with a relatively organized collection of cardboard boxes, then gradually descending into entropy. The neatly stacked and labeled boxes give way to folded towers of clothes, which themselves devolve into vaguely sorted piles before any sense of order is completely lost, and what is left is various piles of junk. Sydney lets out a long sigh, seemingly bracing herself for what she might find in here. She takes a couple of steps into the room and turns back to me. She takes a hair tie that she's been wearing around her wrist and begins to pull her hair back into a ponytail.
Don't just stand there, we've got work to do.
Sydney and I briefly discuss the best way to approach the mess, before deciding that the simplest approach is probably the best. Start at one end of the room and begin consolidating everything into 3 simple groups: keep, donate, and trash.
So, good news is, we don't need to worry about throwing away anything important. Charlie's stuff stayed pretty much exactly where it was after she disappeared. My dad's stuff is in all those boxes. Everything that's laying out is either mine or my mom's, so you can just use your best judgment deciding which pile to put everything in.
Are you sure about that? I don't want to get rid of anything you might want.
If I really wanted it, I would have come in here and got it at some point in the last 6 years.
But what about your mom?
I don't think she'll care one way or the other.
But I don't...
Just trust me on this. Now sort.
We begin to comb through the various pieces of clothing, discarded school projects, and childhood mementos. I don't have the heart to throw away another person's things, so nearly everything starts going towards the keep pile.
Nuh-uh. Get rid of it.
But I just don't...
Listen, if it's closed, just donate it, alright?
Alright. Continuing on, most of the clothing, per Sydney's wishes, ends up in the donate pile. Every once in a while, however, she'll see a particular piece of clothing and chime in.
Ugh, trash that, please.
Eventually, after about an hour and a half, most of the various pieces of clutter have been sorted through. Most of the clothes have found their way to a small collection of cardboard boxes marked Donate. A small plastic crate contains the various knickknacks and souvenirs of the past that even Sydney was too sentimental to get rid of. A handful of dance trophies, a few toys, and one completely untouched art set.
I might get to that at some point.
As for the trash pile, it's surprisingly small. For a room full of junk, there was shockingly little that wasn't worthy of saving. With the largest portion of the mess sorted, our attention turns to the various cardboard boxes containing Bill Cooper's personal effects. By my count, there are about 20. It shouldn't take too long, but Sydney seems apprehensive as she stares at the boxes. Should we take a break?
No. Let's just get it over with. Shouldn't take much longer.
What are you planning to do with all of this?
I don't know yet, but it can't be in here. Let's just put it all in my room for now.
Sounds good. Neither of us move for a moment. I look over at Sydnie, who hasn't taken her eyes off the boxes. She takes a deep breath, then steps forward. She picks up the nearest box with some hesitation and turns. She looks up at me.
Let's go.
Quickly, I follow her lead, picking up a box and carrying it to her room. We make a couple more trips. Sydnie is clearly in a rush to get this part of the process over with, practically sprinting back and forth. After our 5th trip, we're about halfway through the pile when suddenly...
Shit!
There's a clattering of plastic and metal as the bottom of the box Sydnie is holding suddenly bursts open, depositing its contents onto the floor with a crash. With an exasperated sigh, Sydnie tosses the empty box to the side.
God damn it, stupid fucking...
Sydnie drops to the floor and begins to gather the scattered contents of the box. Immediately, I go to help her. Here, let me...
No, just let me... Sorry. Thanks. I just need to go find some tape. I'll be right back.
With a huff, Sydnie stands and walks out of the room. I begin gathering up the mess on the floor. I chuckle as I realize what it is I'm looking at. Recording equipment. It's certainly older than my setup, still using cassette tapes to capture the audio. The recorder itself is a decidedly old-school design that nowadays is referred to as a shoebox. A small plastic rectangle about 6 inches wide and 10 inches long, incorporating a speaker at the top, 6 large plastic switches at the bottom to control the various playback functions, and the compartment that houses the cassette sandwiched in the middle. The silver paint on the device is scuffed off around the corners, but otherwise it looks well taken care of. A simple cloth strap is connected to 2 pegs that have been bolted to either side of the recorder, seemingly to aid in recording on the go, and a thin wire runs from the side of the device to a small handheld microphone a few feet away. As I pick up the recorder, I hear a rattling coming from inside it. Peering through the small plastic window of the cassette compartment, I realize there's something inside. I hit the eject button and the compartment springs open. After a bit of fussing, I'm able to fish the object out of the recorder. It appears to be a necklace. A small, white piece of what I can only assume is animal bone hangs down from a long leather cord. Fascinated, I bring it closer to my face and see, just barely, that something is carved into the bone. A symbol resembling a tree branch. As I stare intently at the mark, unable to avert my gaze, I swear that it begins to glow. A faint orange hue radiates from the gashes in the bone like embers of a dying fire. Around me, the world seems to fall away. I drop the necklace as a sharp pain bolts through my head. I close my eyes and clutch the sides of my head. A foul smell like burning hair fills my nostrils. I hear a sound. A girl screaming, pleading for help. It's faint, as if it's coming from miles away. But there's something familiar about the sound of her voice, but I can't place it. I clench my teeth as the pain in my head intensifies, when suddenly...
Scott?
In an instant, the pain is gone, and I'm immediately aware of my surroundings. Sydnie stands in front of me, clutching a roll of packing tape. She wears a look of concern on her face.
You, all right there?
Yeah. Sorry, just a headache.
All right.
She stares at me for a moment longer before grabbing the empty box she threw aside earlier and retaping the bottom. She sets it down next to me and begins to gather up the various objects strewn about the floor and set them in the box. Quickly, I gather up the mess in front of me and consolidate it into a neat pile. As I do so, I realize that the necklace is nowhere to be found. I feel a pit in my stomach. I couldn't have imagined it. Could I? I look up and see that Sydnie is still looking at me with concern.
You sure you're okay?
I'm fine. Thanks. We continue packing up the box in silence. I can feel Sydnie staring at me. Desperate to change the subject, I ask, "So, why did your dad have all this stuff?"
What, the tape recorder?
Yeah.
It was for one of his hobbies.
Oh. And which hobby was that? She hesitates for a moment.
Bird watching.
Your dad needed a tape recorder for bird watching?
He said it was to record bird calls.
Was he always so interested in birds?
No, it only started after Charley disappeared. For the first year or so, he and my mom were arguing a lot about everything. Even back then, I knew he blamed himself for Charley going missing, and he wasn't handling it well. There were days he'd just storm out of the house mid-argument. Mom would cry about it, and Dad would be gone for a few hours, and then he'd come home, and They'd kiss and make up. Then they'd go through the whole thing again next week. Tensions were high in the Cooper house. One night after he stormed out, he came home carrying this big box of stuff. He told us that he was sorry for how he'd been acting lately and that he decided to take up bird watching to get his mind off things. He'd gone to one of the antique shops in town and bought all this old sound equipment. Said it'd be nice to go out and listen to the forest with it. After that, every weekend, he'd go out with his bag of tricks and be gone for an entire day.
I take it you and your mom never went with him.
I tried. I'd always ask if I could come with, and he'd always say, "Sorry, kiddo, you'll scare the birds away." Eventually, I just stopped asking. Mom never really had any desire to go. I don't think Dad would have let her if she had asked anyway.
Why not?
Well, for one thing, I'm pretty sure he was never out there recording bird calls.
What makes you say that?
Well, after the accident, I never found any of his tapes. He was going out practically every weekend for years, and I couldn't find a single tape he made. Either someone stole all of them, or...
He was out there looking for Charley.
What else could it have been?
I don't know. He could have been having an affair. Sydney looks at me, clearly unamused. Sorry.
Don't joke about that.
I wasn't. I was just... I'm sorry.
You didn't know him. He wouldn't do that.
I know. I'm sorry. I crossed a line. Sydney looks like she's about to say something further, but decides against it, just sighing instead. I really am sorry. I didn't mean anything by it.
I know. It's... Whatever, don't worry about it. Let's just finish with the boxes.
After we finish packing up the box, Sydney picks it up and proceeds to carry it to her room. I stand and grab another box from the pile, following her. Soon the task is done and Charley's room is completely cleaned out. Sydney and I sit on the floor, our backs against the closet door as we survey the scene before us. It's like it's not even the same room.
I know. It looks... the way it should. The way I remember it.
Do you need help taking the donation boxes somewhere?
No, you've done enough. Travis should be taking them after he drops Charley off.
He's not sticking around?
Oh, no. I'm not sure how my mom's going to react to seeing him.
But Charley's back, and clearly Travis didn't hurt her.
I know that, and you know that, but my mom... It's hard to explain.
I see. Thank you for talking to me about your dad.
Thanks for listening. Sorry for snapping at you.
No. I deserve that.
Not really. You were just contributing to the conversation. It was harmless.
We sit silently for a moment. My mind ventures back to the necklace and the symbol carved into it. What had happened to it? Did it get lost in the shuffle when we were repacking the box? Or had it even been there in the first place? I'm snapped back to reality by Sydney's voice.
Hey, do you think it'd be all right if...
Sydney's attention is almost immediately pulled by the sound of slippers dragging along the floor outside. I look towards the sound just in time to see Nancy Cooper walk into the room. She wears an old t-shirt displaying the name of a university I've never heard of, presumably her alma mater, a pair of bright pink pajama pants, and a light blue bathrobe. Her hair is unkempt and matted where she seems to have been sleeping on it until recently. Her eyes are wide as she slowly turns and examines her surroundings. Her gaze makes its way towards me, and she stops. We make eye contact briefly before I look away, slightly uncomfortable.
Hey, Mama.
Nancy's head quickly turns towards Sydney.
This is Scott. He's a reporter doing a story on Charley. He helped me clean out her room. I told you about him, remember?
Nancy glances towards me, back at Sydney, then slowly turns and looks at the room once again. Sydney stands up with a grunt, then walks towards her mother.
Looks nice, right? Mom?
Nancy looks back at Sydney with a smile, which quickly morphs into a frown.
Scott, what time is it?
It is 1:13.
Shit. Hey, Mama. Go downstairs and I'll make you lunch, all right? I'll be right there. Promise. I'm sorry I forgot.
Nancy smiles once again as she turns and exits. Sydney watches as she does so. I sit silently until the sound of Sydney's mother going down the stairs echoes into the room. Is she always...
Some days are worse than others.
I see.
But some days are better too. Either way, she's not much of a talker.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. You get used to it. It's fine. You hungry?
20 minutes later, I sit in the Cooper kitchen with Sydnie and her mother as we have lunch. It's a quiet meal. There's an air of suspense hanging over the house as Sydnie and I wait for what happens next. Nancy picks at her food like a child who doesn't want to eat their vegetables.
Oh. Seriously?
What is it?
Travis says they'll be here in 5 minutes.
Well, that's good.
He could have given me a little more notice. The living room's still a mess. And,
Is there anything I can do?
can you bring down the donation boxes, please?
I can do that.
Thank you. Mom, please finish your lunch.
Nancy pays no attention to Sydnie or myself as we stand and head towards the living room. Where do you want them?
Just put them in here. By the front door is fine.
Got it. As I make my way upstairs, I see Sydnie immediately begin picking up various pieces of clutter in the living room. Each time I bring one of the boxes back downstairs, the room seems to have gone through a minor transformation. By the time I finish, the living room looks nothing like it did mere minutes ago. Sydnie sits on the couch, visibly tired from her cleaning sprint. Wow, you work fast.
Just don't look in the closet. Or the garage. And here they are. Mama, come in here.
I'll go wait in the kitchen.
What? Why? Mama!
I mean, it's a family thing. I wouldn't feel right.
It's okay. I don't mind, and I don't think...
It's fine. I should be able to hear everything I need from the kitchen.
All right. Mom!
I make my way back to the kitchen. As I enter, I see Nancy Cooper standing in front of the fridge, staring at the door. I almost say something before she suddenly turns and makes her way towards the living room. The fridge is covered with cheap alphabet magnets of various colors and sizes. A few hold up various notes and documents, bills, schedules, messages from Sydnie to her mother. I see now that Nancy was rearranging the magnets to spell out a message. Well, just a word, really. Charley. As I sit down at the kitchen table once more, I quickly try to orient myself to catch a glimpse of what's occurring in the other room. As Nancy makes her way to the door, Sydnie opens it. In the doorway stands Charley. She has a look on her face that seems to be a blend of apprehension and homesick nostalgia. She smiles faintly and waves as she sees her mother approaching. Nancy waves back. I see that behind Charley, a pickup truck is parked in the driveway, still running. I can only assume that Travis is sitting in the driver's seat, waiting for an all-clear signal so he can come into the house. Sydnie takes her mother's hand and walks her over to the side of the door, getting out of the way. As Charley gazes through the entryway of her childhood home, I can see a tear run down her cheek. Quickly, she wipes her eyes with her sleeve and, with a deep breath, steps inside.
Night Falls, California is a production of Night Falls Media. Episode 3, Homecoming, was written and directed by Alexander Greig and Robert F. Wilson, with original music by Tyler Tingey. This episode features Robert F. Wilson as Scott Sinclair, Alexis Ross as Sydnie Cooper, Ken Osborne as Richard Nellis, with Harrison Langford as Travis Warren, and Jordyn Aspyn as Charley Cooper. Want to know more? Visit nightfallsmedia.com, where you can find links to our social media, new episodes and new shows, merchandise, and more. Also, consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get early access to episodes, exclusive merch, and behind-the-scenes content. Visit patreon.com/nightfallsmedia to learn more. Thanks for listening.